So, ladies and gentlemen, listeners to the HPANWO show on HPANWO Radio, I'm joined by a gentleman I've had on the show several times before, and he's back. It's Mark Devlin. Hey, Mark.
Hey, Ben. Good to be back with you, man.
It's good to talk to you again. How are you getting on?
Yeah, just getting on with it. You know, life is busy. It's challenging. Just getting on with it and doing what needs to be done, basically.
I wanted to bring you on the show because I know you're very much a generalist. I know you specialise in the music scene, but you are a generalist as well. You discuss other subjects like myself.
Oh, yes, I do like to get into other things, yeah.
Oh, it's all connected, isn't it? It's all connected.
Well, ultimately it is, yeah.
And you made some very interesting social media posts, which is the reason I thought of you specifically when I was looking for guests to be on this show, because I wanted to make this a show with more than one guest. You made some very good social media posts, very thought-provoking ones about old Jeffrey Epstein. So this is quite something, isn't it? This particular subject. What's your take on Jeffrey Epstein?
Well, I'm not sure how much value I can be of in terms of offering a meaningful perspective on it, because I'm just as confused by the whole thing as anyone else. And I think this is the point. None of us out here in the general public who aren't a part of the inner circle involved in this story, and why the hell would you want to be, are left to judge this situation according to our best guesses, based on the information we've had access to. But nobody ultimately really has the definitive answer as to what this is all about. So as far as an average member of the general public is concerned, they've probably swallowed the official storyline that this guy committed suicide in his jail cell, somehow found a way of doing that, even though the mainstream media reporting has been casting some doubt on whether that happened, or at least they were in the early stages, because we were getting headlines like apparently committed suicide or is said to have committed suicide. So the confusion starts there. And then if you speak to the average person in the alternative research arena, there's a very strong chance that they would not be buying at all the idea that he committed suicide. And they're more likely to be of the view either that he was done in, Arkancided, possibly, which is the new verb that's come into usage, referring to Bill and Hillary Clinton and the vast number of their opponents from over the years who just happen to have turned up dead in various different circumstances. I think the number is in the hundreds now. It's sort of 400 odd, I think people have counted.
As David Icke would say, just a coincidence, nothing to worry about, as David Icke would say.
Well, I'm sure it is. It's just, unlucky people, just get heart attacks and cancer and car crashes, and it happens, come on. People in the alternative research arena are either going to think that Epstein was done away with so that he couldn't speak up and, spill the beans on what he was involved with, or that the whole thing is a massive hoax and he didn't actually die. He's been spirited away somewhere. A lot of people are suggesting Israel. Tel Aviv seems to be a popular suggestion. And, we're told that he's off the scene so that nobody expects any more to develop from this story. And what's actually happened, according to this school of thought, is that he's just living out the rest of his years under some sort of witness protection program. So we can speculate till the cows come home as to which of those viewpoints is correct, or maybe it's a combination of all of them, if it's possible to combine all of them. But ultimately, like I say, we can only speculate, and I doubt we'll ever get to the truth of this matter, because we're not supposed to. And when we're talking about a control system that has been able to pull off things like murdering the president of the United States in broad daylight right in front of everyone's noses and pinning it on a lone nutter gunman and letting the real perpetrators escape justice for 56 years and counting, and a control system that can murder the wife of the future King of England and get away with that and pin it on a drunken driver, and a control system that can switch out one of the most famous musicians and celebrities of the last century, i.e. Paul McCartney, and replace him right under our noses, and the vast majority of people don't seem to have noticed or care, then they really are capable of anything. So is it feasible that Epstein didn't actually die and was taken away somewhere? Absolutely. What doesn't seem very feasible to me, personally, is that he would have committed suicide in his cell. That seems to be rather a convenient solution to this whole quagmire. And it's a very simplistic one that the public is being fobbed off with, so that this story would just go away and get forgotten, just like the Jimmy Savile one has, and just like so many other ones have in recent history.
Yeah, it's true that the difference between what we're told and what really happens is just so vast now that almost anything is possible. I mean, the Paul McCartney thing, I was on the fence for many years about that, but I'm not anymore. I'm pretty certain that is correct. And there are bigger secrets than even what we're seeing with Epstein. I mean, the official story, though, is that he's basically a completely solo operator, and he ran this terrible child abuse network, but he did collaborate with others. That's been said in the original FBI investigation report, and that nothing else was said until literally there was basically a document, a list of documents were opened. They were opened. They were due to be opened, and lots of witness testimony involving his partner, his adult partner, Ghislaine, what's her name?
Ghislaine, is it? Or Ghislaine, do you pronounce it? Maxwell?
Maxwell,
daughter of Robert Maxwell.
Oh, yes, the guy who allegedly fell off his yacht, yeah.
Yeah, like you do, you know.
Yeah. Yes, so there was originally going to be, she was going to be saying all kinds of things, and there was going to be a whole list of people who might be indicted, and then he died, and suddenly Epstein's dead, which means you can't, this means basically you can't have a trial, which means you can't indict anyone else on that list. So, in a sense, if anyone believes that's a coincidence or it's just happened to happen, really, what do you do? There are people saying it, there's people actually saying this is a coincidence.
Well, there will be, because people don't want to accept that the world is this deeply troubling, unsettling, disturbing place where we have to face up to the fact that things aren't the way we're told they are through the mainstream media, because that might involve people having to take some personal responsibility for the situation and starting to pay attention to it and starting to maybe change certain aspects of their lives to measure up to the challenges that these sort of situations present to us. But yeah, people do tend to die at convenient times. I don't know if you've noticed this, Ben, but we had Lord McAlpine a few years ago. There was this scandal about him being embroiled in this supposed paedophilic activity, involving this lad that says he was abused by him when he was young in a care home. And there was this whole fiasco involving the BBC, or the ITV, I think it was, that was said to have blown his cover, even though they didn't actually mention his name. But, this whole scandal emerged out of that whole thing. And then Lord McAlpine just happens to pass away, bless him. And then we had Lord Greville Janner, and there was a similar situation with him. I don't know if you've noticed, but there's lots of lords and sirs that crop up on the British side of things when it comes to allegations of pedophilia and child abuse. I'm sure that's just a coincidence as well. But we had Lord Greville Janner, and he was involved in these various accusations. And very soon after that, we're told that he's passed away too. Bless him. So, yes, very convenient timings for these people that just happen to exit this stage at the point where their private lives are being scrutinised very closely.
Yeah, and of course, we all know that the Prime Minister from 1997 onwards would have been John Smith, who appears to be a far more admirable character than Tony Blair. Would have been, although he had a heart attack.
Well, he did. Yes, he did, paving the way for Tony Blair. And Robin Smith, of course, is another Labour politician who I think he had heart failure when he was out walking, doing some, hill climbing in Scotland on holiday. Out of public view and way away from where anyone can see what happened. We're told that poor old Robin, had a nasty turn on his Scottish hiking holiday, and that's the end of Robin. And he just happened to be, someone that had exposed Tony Blair and his spin doctor Alistair Campbell for having concocted this whole idea of Saddam Hussein having weapons of mass destruction that were ready to launch in 45 minutes, which was later shown to have been a complete crock of crap and completely fabricated to justify military action being launched against Iraq. And Robin Cook is pretty much the only politician that got vocal about that and exposed it. And I have to have a certain amount of respect for him for that, because it's not something you often get from politicians. But then we know the rest. Robin goes on a walking holiday, and that's the end of him. And then we can factor in David Kelly, the weapons inspector that was involved in that whole thing as well. And he.
Same issue.
Yeah, and David Kelly goes walking in woodland, in Oxfordshire one morning, and just says to himself, "Do you know, I'm tired of life. I'm going to take this knife that I've got in my pocket and I'm going to slit my wrists and just end it all." So, very convenient timing in all these cases.
Yeah. It's very odd also that even though he apparently slashed his wrist, he didn't bleed hardly at all. It's almost if someone killed him and then took a knife to his wrist up to his dead body.
Well, yeah. So we're seeing a pattern emerge here.
Yeah.
Obviously, this is what we're implying, which is that situations such as Jeffrey Epstein, or Epstein, however you pronounce it, being hauled up in court and answering questions as to who exactly he had on his Lolita Express private plane flown out to his island, who attended these parties, who had sex with underage girls and kids and whatever else went on in that place, and the likes of Prince Andrew, whose name has already been brought into this whole affair, and Bill and Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, and even Stephen Hawking, for God's sake. I've heard in previous accounts of Epstein's island and his orgies and stuff, Stephen Hawking's name came up. I don't even like to think about the graphic detail of how that would have occurred. But the idea that Epstein would be up there saying, well, yes, I flew Prince Andrew out and he had sex with this person, and Bill Clinton had sex with these children and whatever. The very idea that he would be allowed to do that and it would go on the public record and all these people would get exposed is just a farce. Yeah. When you've been looking into the way this world really works for as long as the likes of you and me have, Ben, and many of the people that will listen to your show, the very idea that would ever be allowed to happen is just farcical. And so what it seems to be is an exercise in damage limitation and public relations, whereby the general public, who don't really look into these things, they just take the headlines from the BBC and the Daily Mail and CNN at face value, are being asked to believe that something is being done. It's creating the impression that something is being done about this epidemic of pedophilia that we have everywhere, that we keep hearing about. We are trying to deal with it, folks. Oh, yeah. And so we arrested this guy, this billionaire, playboy that had this island and stuff. And we were trying to bring him to justice, and we were trying to, stamp out this terrible situation that we've got. But sorry, folks, he committed suicide in his jail cell. So that's the end of it now.
How about that? Yeah, it's so predictable. A lot of people can see this now. I mean, it's if he'd stayed alive and gone to court, the trial would have been a sensation. It would be like the trial of O.J. Simpson. It would have, and of course, it would have made a legal media history. And of course, in the United States, the legal process is far more widely publicised than it is in Britain. You can actually have TV cameras in the courtroom and things like that, which you can't have in Britain. Everyone would have been glued to it, on the edge of their seats. And of course, during the course of the trial, they couldn't conduct that trial without him testifying and naming names, which is why so many people were expecting this. And when I heard the news, Jeffrey Epstein's dead, I just saw it. I saw Jeffrey Epstein dead. I shrugged. I didn't even flinch. For example, this is a tweet. This is a novelty tweet, which is what it's not from Hillary Clinton, but it's what it would like. This was someone tweeted this for a joke on the 8th of July, or concocted this fake tweet. This is from Hillary Clinton. Jeffrey Epstein, such a close friend to us over the years. When he commits suicide next week, from 2 gunshots to the back of his head, it will be so unexpected, and it'll take such a heavy toll on us. And I thought this was someone made this up on July the 8th, and it went viral. So. Yeah. What
darkly amusing.
Yeah, and what I've been encouraged by, though, Mark, is that when this happened, the way I behaved. The way I responded seems to be very widespread among people who may not have thought in a conspiratorial way before. In other words, this has been a massive red pill that people predicted it, and now it's happened. Obviously, the people who carried out this murder or this spiriting away or whatever they did it at enormous cost, because they would know the effect it would have. They would realise that it would have that effect on the population, but they decided they were faced with this dilemma, and so they decided to sacrifice that for the sake of preventing him from testifying.
Well, they've had previous situations to judge this dynamic by, and one of them, when it comes to the British general public, would be the Jimmy Savile situation, which was 2012 when that whole thing blew up. So we're on 7 years now, just coming up. And although there was a brief furore about it at the time, and it set tongues wagging at the water cooler at work, here we are getting on for 7 years later, and nobody's really talking about it. Not really. If you ask the average person in the street about the Savile situation, they'd say, oh yeah, it's terrible, wasn't it? Yeah, still it's done now, what can you do? And nobody really got outraged about it. Everyone's still paying their BBC licence fee. The BBC continues strong as it ever was with its mind control and propaganda. So I think the controllers in this case were prepared to take a gamble on the general public just letting this one go as well. And time will pass. The days, the weeks, the months will go by. Other things will fill the headlines, and in time, everyone will forget about Jeffrey Epstein. And you could mention him in 5 or 10 years from now, and a lot of people would probably even struggle to recall his name. So they're just banking on most people not stepping up, not getting outraged, not taking any personal responsibility, because sadly, most people never do. So the message we're left with is that the only paedophiles in the world are dead ones, because we only get to find out about the likes of Jimmy Savile and all these different sirs like Sir Edward Heath, Sir Clement Freud, all these many others that have been named after they die. It's like, oops, sorry, folks. Oh, we just discovered he was a paedophile. Still, he's dead now, so what can you do? There's no living paedophiles out there,
Yeah, it's except sort of normal people, sort of common people, not important.
Oh, yeah, the grubby perverts that hang outside school gates. We can throw them to the dogs, throw them under a bus, but not the sirs and the lords, only the dead ones.
Yeah, it is a sad state of affairs, and I really hope, obviously I hope that this time the people will call their bluff, and that the population will not just forget about it, and this will be something transformative. It could be the 100th monkey, if you like. But of course, we won't know that for a while yet. At the moment, it's still fresh in the news. We'll have to see how it lasts once the news cycles have turned around. Because, of course, as you know, there's a massive amount of stuff to distract us, as you've just explained.
Well, there is, There's always another story coming along to overwrite the previous one.
It wouldn't surprise me if you when the investigation comes out into Epstein's death, alleged death, don't be surprised if there's something massive happens. Maybe a major member of the royal family dying or something like that, to distract people away from it. To
completely eclipse it, yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I mean, there's previous on that as well. People are probably familiar with the story of Donald Rumsfeld announcing that several trillion dollar deficit in the American budget, which was announced on the 10th of September 2001. Anything significant happened the following day? Can you remember to sort of wipe that from people's memories? So, yeah, they do this all the time. There are contradictions all over the place when it comes to the accounts of what happened with Epstein's apparent suicide as well. I don't know if you've heard, there was an account apparently from somebody that worked at the correctional facility where he was being held, who said it was very unusual when someone has attempted suicide once, because you might remember, was it a couple of weeks ago or just after he was first arrested, we got the story that Epstein was discovered unconscious in his cell, and this was being chalked up as an attempted suicide then that had failed. And then, a couple of weeks later, or however many days it was, we get the news that, actually this time he has actually killed himself. And this person that worked in this correctional facility was saying, if somebody has attempted suicide once, they're going to be on constant watch 24 hours a day to make sure they don't attempt it again. And that protocol appears to have been breached in this case, whereby he was able to succeed the second time. That's if you buy that story in the first place. And then there was an account of another inmate that was being held in the same jail who apparently came out and said that he heard screams and a commotion and a kerfuffle going on in Epstein's cell shortly before we're told he committed suicide. So as with all stories, there's contradictions, anomalies, discrepancies, all this conflicting, confusing information to get your head around. And it just makes the whole thing become an absolute mind-boggling cesspit and quagmire of information, a minefield that just becomes impossible to navigate.
Yeah, the suicide watch issue is very interesting because Epstein. I mean, I looked at a list of the other prisoners who are being held there, and this is not these are not just kids caught scrumping in his lordship's garden. These are the top criminals. If Osama bin Laden had ever been captured alive, he would have been kept in this place. This particular facility in New York City has,
Right.
and Jeffrey Epstein was the hottest legal property the country had seen for years. He was a multi-billionaire arrested for these horrific crimes against humanity. And he was in a position where he was a suicide risk. People in that position often commit suicide. Prisoners on death row are often watched on suicide watch simply because they want to cheat the hangman, so to speak. So of course the stringers, the conditions he'd be under. Firstly, he'd be in permanent solitary confinement. He would not share the cell with anybody else. His exercise periods would be taken alone. Whenever he ate anything, he'd be eating with a plastic spoon. It's the only cutlery he'd be allowed because it's the only thing you can't use as a suicide weapon. He'd have been wearing slippers without any shoelaces because you can turn a shoelace into a ligature. His clothes would have been specially designed so you can't sort of tear them into strips and make them into ropes. Of course, the cell itself would have no hooks or anything you would hang something on. And the CCTV, you mentioned the CCTV. Now, there's a story apparently that the CCTV broke down during the crucial period that allowed Epstein to kill himself.
That's never happened before, has it?
Are you thinking Paris, 19?
Well, I'm thinking every sort of major event in the world of the past 25 years, actually.
Exactly.
Was it an Israeli security company by any remote stretch of the imagination?
Oh, you mean the one that was looking after Fukushima? Yeah. and 7/7,
a tunnel and all these different airports and everything else.
Yeah. And it's weird, isn't it? It's like I wish. Why doesn't it happen when you're driving at 31 miles an hour through a 30-mile-an-hour zone? And you get a nasty letter and a fine in the post the next day? Why do they never break down then? That would be convenient, wouldn't it, for me?
Yeah. Well, the next time they attempt something like this, they should do it on the M4 in the 50-mile-an-hour average speed zone because, that will certainly get captured on camera.
They all work perfectly. They always work perfectly, don't they? It's like...
I've noticed this. Yeah, I have noticed this. But, jesting aside, we have another problem with Prince Andrew involvement in this thing, or alleged involvement. Prince Andrew's name has come up many times before, not just this time round of this story, because Epstein has been in the headlines a few times over the past few years regarding this island place that he operated and all these wild parties. And Prince Andrew's name has constantly come up in the guest list of people that attended. And Buckingham Palace was forced to issue a statement the last time this emerged, stating that Prince Andrew was involved in no impropriety whatsoever and there's no truth to these rumours. That's a surprise, isn't it? What a surprising statement that is. I never imagined they'd come out with that one. And, Buckingham Palace has issued a similar statement this time saying, once again, we reiterate that Prince Andrew has done nothing wrong. But we do have a bit of a problem in that if he had been involved in the type of activities that are being claimed, the court system, the whole judicial system in the United Kingdom is owned by the Crown Corporation, which, the head of which is the Queen, Andrew's mother. So there doesn't seem to be any kind of system in place should a member of the royal family be involved in any kind of crime. There's just this unspoken acceptance that it would never happen. And the public is just being asked to be completely okay with the notion that no member of the royal family would ever engage in any criminal activity whatsoever. For everyone else in the nation, there's a system in place that if we, overstep the line and do something wrong, our ass can be hauled into court and a system is in place to deal with us. But that system does not exist for the likes of Prince Andrew or any other members of the royal family. So it's a bit of a flaw in the system. And it's asking a lot of the general public to just trust that none of this lot would ever get up to anything wrong.
We literally do, yeah.
Again, those who involve themselves in alternative research will probably be familiar with the story of the Queen and Prince Philip when they visited Canada in 1969, and they were seen with a group of children from a care home. They were seen wandering off with them, and none of these kids were ever seen or heard of again. So that's quite an interesting story that would have been looked into if it had been anyone other than members of the royal family involved. But because it was them, these kids have gone missing and, that's just the way it goes. So, there are instances where the royal family may have been involved in the odd criminal activity. I'm thinking, the demise of Princess Diana. There's a possibility that they might have known a little bit about what went on there. But as I said, there's no system to deal with them. So we're just asked to accept that they're nice people who would never engage in criminal activities. I think this Epstein situation has just reinforced that whole dynamic that we have before us as well.
Hopefully it'll make it more obvious, because you're right. Constitutionally the Queen cannot be prosecuted because she is always the prosecutor. It's the Crown Court. She is the Crown, but obviously her family technically can be prosecuted. But of course, as you just said, in reality that doesn't happen. And indeed, the United States, of course, does not have a royal family. However, it does have pretty much a similar form of nepotism. For example, Epstein has been charged and prosecuted before for these sorts of crimes. However, the first time in 2008, he got 13 months in an open prison, which if it had been you or me, they'd have thrown away the key. So
right. It obviously rehabilitated him really well then.
He just went straight back. I would be surprised if when he was on day release, he was just up to his usual tricks. Yeah, it's... So hopefully this is now going to make people aware. I think in a sense, I feel like the veil is falling at the moment. It's becoming more and more obvious. And even though, Mr. Basiato, the mayor of New York City, he basically said about Epstein's death, and he actually is the mayor of the city where this crime happened, which is incredible. So he's in a very interesting position. He's running for president as well. He said, I can't remember his exact words, but he basically said pretty much what we said about Epstein's death. He didn't believe it was a suicide, and he believed the authorities were covering that up. And so for a man in that position to say something is incredible. I wish Giuliani had said something similar over 9/11, quite frankly.
Well, yeah. But, maybe there's some value in the fact that this story is so bloody obviously concocted or not as we're told it is, because I think, a lot of people are very suspicious about what we're being told. They are acknowledging that it's very convenient that this guy just happens to commit suicide just before he's due to testify against some of the most famous and powerful people on earth, potentially. And so this is going to raise questions in their mind as to the true nature of this world and what really goes on in it, and also the way the mainstream media reports things and the way that we don't actually have investigative journalists who really get stuck into a story and go wherever the leads take them, no matter how disturbing the information might be. All we have is the many different expressions of the mainstream media all parroting the same official story. So all the news networks in the United States are going to be peddling exactly the same story as all the news networks in the United Kingdom and everywhere else around the world. There's no real variation from the story. You don't get intrepid reporters uncovering different aspects to it and saying, we've just discovered this about Jeffrey Epstein. This adds a whole new dimension to the story. All you just get is the official version reinforced again and again. And that's probably making some people suspicious who may previously have thought the world is this nice, pleasant place where everything just chugs along the way it's supposed to, and the mainstream media tell us exactly what's going on. So even though it might not result in people rising up and taking any kind of action or taking any kind of personal responsibility for changing their own behaviors and actions, maybe a seed is slowly being planted in the minds of many. And when more news events of this kind come along, as they surely will over the months and years, that seed might just germinate further, and these people might start to question the whole nature of this world and this reality. And if that's happening on a very large scale with large numbers of people around the world, though it will be happening much slower than many of us would like, at least it will be happening, and there's some potential for change some distance off into the future. So I guess we just have to cling to that aspect of it in terms of trying to find some optimism from this whole thing.
I agree. I hope so. That's the way I'm looking at it. Let's let some good come out of the. Obviously, I'm not weeping for this man. Good riddance to him. I'm not sorry he's dead, but in his death or his disappearance or whatever it was, hopefully it could have a backlash, which will be good. So, Mark, what are you up to these days in terms of your work? Because you're a productive guy, aren't you?
Well, yeah, I've got one or two things on the go, Ben, you might say. My main project over the past few months has been the writing of my next book, and this is my first forays into the world of fiction, which you're very familiar with yourself, I know. You've put out, what is it, 3 books now?
5.
5, wow, okay. Very productive. So, yeah, I've kind of taken a leaf out of your book, excuse the pun, and... I noted a while back that you've done works of fiction, and that was partly the inspiration for me wanting to have a stab at it myself.
Oh, cool.
And so I've really enjoyed the process. I've been working on a book which is to be called The Cause and the Cure, and it's an allegorical novel. So on the surface of it, it's a crime thriller. It's set in Oxford, which both of us know very well. And it's set in 1990, going into the early months of 1991. So on the surface of it, it's going to be a little bit Inspector Morse-ish, I guess. It's a more rough and gritty version of Inspector Morse. So there's a series of murders that take place around Oxford, and the police get involved. But the central character in the story is a radio reporter. It's a female radio reporter who works for a station which is very closely modelled on Fox FM. The radio station for Oxfordshire back in the day, which is no longer operational. But back in 1990, I got my first industry job as a T-boy and a general, dog's body newsroom assistant in Fox FM. So a lot of the storyline is based around my experiences of working in the newsroom at Fox. And it's full of period detail from those times, because in 1990, though it's hard for people to conceptualize now, there were no computers and no electronic technology. Everything that was done in that radio station back in 1990 was analog. So technology like reels of tape, quarter-inch reels of tape, and cartridges were being used, and cassettes and typewriters. I've got vivid memories of reporters sitting around clashing away at typewriter keys and ripping out sheets of paper as little as 29 years ago. So the book is full of period detail from those times. It draws very heavily on the acid house and rave scene, which was in full flow in 1990. But the book is layered. So if you want to read it as a thriller, then I like to think that it's going to be an engaging story on that level. But if you are someone that likes to dig beneath the surface and you like looking for metaphors, allegories, symbolism, that's all going to be there. There's going to be loads of clues that people who really want to delve into this story can try and unearth, like a treasure trove of different clues. And I've been inspired in that process by the likes of Stanley Kubrick and everything that he encoded into his movies. It's incredible. There's a whole industry now of researchers and analysts who are poring over the work of Stanley Kubrick 20 years after his death, and they're discovering all kinds of hidden symbolism and messages embedded into his films, all these decades later. And it just amazes me that he was able to encode so much into his films. So his films made sense on the surface of it, as gripping storylines, but there was so much more to find. And I've tried to do that with my book. So I've buried away loads of stuff that people with an open mind that are into spiritual teachings and natural law understandings and things like that are going to be able to identify. And one of the things is in the names of the characters. So the names of all the lead characters in the story are encoded, and you find out something about the characters just from looking at their names. So yeah, it's been a great process, mate. Really enjoyed it. Can't wait to unleash it. I've got the cover art designed for the sleeve already. So it's really just a case of finishing off the last couple of chapters, getting the typesetting and proofreading done, and then getting it on the streets.
Oh, fantastic. Well, it's great to welcome you to this wonderful world of fiction writing, and I'm really glad you've discovered it. And I look forward to reading. I look forward to reading the book enormously. So when it comes out, hope you'll come back on the show and we can talk about it.
I would love to, yeah. Many thanks.
Brilliant. Oh, thanks very much, Mark. It's been great to talk to you again, and thanks for your insights into this a very interesting issue. So
yeah, thanks, man. I do enjoy talking about things other than the music industry, so I always appreciate the invitation to do that.
Great. Okay, you take care.
Thanks a lot, mate. Cheers.